Conversation on Facebook and Twitter with Good Day Dakota.
It's 6:40. Welcome back. As you can see, U.S. Senator Kevin Cramer joins us this morning on Good Day Dakota. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning. It's good to be with you.
Thank you. So the first question involves how COVID-19 is impacting North Dakota's oil and natural gas industry. One thing that we do know is that these entities were taking loans from big banks, and now that oil is the price of oil is at a historic low, and it does not look like demand will go up for the foreseeable future. These banks are not going to give these oil and gas companies these loans.
Yeah.
So what does that mean for North Dakota's oil and gas industry?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because North Dakota's oil and gas industry is made up of some large companies, but there's a lot of mid-sized producers, and of course the supply chain, the value chain, both upstream and downstream, is made up of a lot of smaller businesses, and so everybody's in a little different position. With regard to the large producers and the large banks, as you point out, there's yesterday's drop-off was really significant, obviously, with regard to the futures markets, and the bankability of these companies really comes into question. Some of the companies are more leveraged than other companies. Some of the companies have done a good job with using the financial tools. They maybe have a little more cash. They've repositioned, restructured their debt in various ways. They have put options, and they've hedged. Others have not. So it kind of depends on the company itself. But this is where the government's CARES package that we passed comes in, particularly as it relates to the larger companies. So with regard to restructuring loans and things, there's some issues that we're working through just today, in fact. Things like a BBB rating is required in order to be restructured under the CARES Act, the Federal Reserve credit tools. But that BBB rating had to be in place on March 22nd, which was well past COVID-19 demand drop. It was well past even the Saudi Arabia Russia price war. So we think that's a little bit unfair. So we're still working with Treasury and Federal Reserve to try and provide some tools to allow the banks and the companies to restructure some debt to help the companies get through this downturn.
Now, Senator, some big banks such as JP Morgan Chase are thinking about seizing these companies before these companies file for bankruptcy, because these oil and gas companies have been taking loans from banks such as Chase.
Sure.
And if they do file bankruptcy before the big banks seize them, those banks lose a lot of money.
Yeah. So, frankly, a little bit what we saw yesterday with regard to the futures market relates to investors that made investments in bet poorly. Obviously, it was more of a financial problem than it was really a fundamental problem. For the banks that want to seize, obviously we'd like to be able to bridge something that would prevent that from happening. I don't think most banks want to own oil companies, but they also don't want their investments to file for bankruptcy, and we'd prefer that they not. But again, every company's positioned differently, and in some cases it might be best for the company to do one thing or the other. It's up to the company to make those decisions, obviously. But this is why the financial tools that are in the CARES Act that pertain to the Federal Reserve and Treasury. Treasury, remember, we had $454 billion that they would then leverage for about another $4 trillion to either utilize existing widely available credit facilities or create some. We're working to make sure that the oil and gas industry can have access to some of those tools to avoid exactly the scenario you're talking about.
All right, so what's the final takeaway message for North Dakota's economy?
Well, the final takeaway message for North Dakota's economy is like everybody's, and that is, let's get this doggone COVID-19 thing whipped. Let's get our economy going again and increase that demand. But it's going to be a fairly long haul, I'm afraid, particularly with oil and gas, because so many of the producers around the world are filling up everything that can be filled up. And I'm convinced there are swimming pools somewhere in the Middle East that have oil in them. And so we have such a supply glut and a production glut that it's going to take a while to work through that. But we can't even begin to do that until people are flying again, driving again, factories are open again. So really the bottom line is, for this, like, as is with everything, let's get the economy going again so that we can increase our demand.
All right, thank you, Senator.
My pleasure, thank you.
All right, let's switch gears here and toss it to Amber for a look at the weather.
Well, Josh, we now have a red flag warning that was issued just a few minutes ago for the Southwest. Now, this